When the news broke on June 11th, 2025, that Brian Wilson had passed away, the world seemed to pause for a moment. Across the globe, radio stations filled the air with good vibrations. God only knows, and wouldn't it be nice? Paul McCartney called him music's greatest innovator. Fans spoke of him as a man who turned California's sunshine into sound. But while the world celebrated his brilliance, one voice, the only one who truly knew both his genius and his pain, remained silent. That voice belonged to Marilyn Rovell Wilson, Brian's first wife, the woman who had lived beside his rising genius and his gradual unraveling. For nearly 45 years, she never spoke publicly about him. No interviews, no memoirs, no documentaries. She simply vanished from his story. Until now. Because just days after Brian's death, something extraordinary surfaced. A handwritten letter quietly sent to their daughters Carney and Wendy. It wasn't meant for tabloids or book deals. It was meant for truth. That letter would forever change how we understand one of music's most tortured geniuses. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. In that private letter, written on June 5th, astonishingly 6 days before Brian's death, Marilyn began with words few expected from someone who had endured so much pain beside him. I loved Brian with all my heart, but I watched him disappear into a world only he could see, and no one, not even me, could save him. These weren't the words of bitterness. They were words of release. They weren't for fame, but for closure, for herself, for her daughters, and for the man she once loved. Carney kept the letter with her throughout her father's funeral, and later, during a quiet family gathering, she read portions aloud. There were no cameras, no reporters, only family, tears, and the unfiltered truth of a story too painful to share while Brian was still alive. Before we go deeper into Marilyn's revelations, it's important to understand just how fragile Brian's brilliance truly was. For decades, his genius came at a devastating cost few ever saw. Here are 5 truths, each one confirming how much of his music was born from pain rather than paradise. 1. He often composed music while crying uncontrollably. During sessions for Pet Sounds, studio engineers recalled Brian's tears falling onto the piano keys. The same songs that uplifted millions were created through exhaustion and despair. 3. He heard voices that criticized his music, even mid-performance. These hallucinations haunted him in studios, on stage, and at home. 5. He worked 20-hour stretches, then collapsed for days. His energy would burn white-hot, then vanish. 7. He instructed musicians not to make direct eye contact with him. It wasn't arrogance, it was fear, anxiety, and the weight of a mind slipping from control. 9. He once spent 3 years refusing to leave his bedroom. During this time, Marilyn cared for both him and their daughters, trying to shield them from the reality that their father was fading. 10. Each fact paints the same picture. Brian Wilson wasn't simply a creative genius, he was a man battling himself every day in silence. To understand Marilyn's letter, we must go back to the beginning. It was 1962. The Beach Boys were just emerging, their harmonies defining a new American optimism. In a recording studio, a 19-year-old Brian Wilson met 15-year-old Marilyn Rovell, a bright-eyed member of the girl group The Honeys. Against her parents' worries and despite resistance from Brian's domineering father, Murray Wilson, the two fell deeply in love. They married in December 1964. Brian was 22, Marilyn just 17. At first, it was idyllic. They were California's golden couple, young, creative, and riding the wave of fame. But beneath the glow of success, something darker began to take root. Brian's mind was already fracturing. The sounds that filled his head weren't just melodies, they were voices. As the world danced to California Girls and Surfer Girl, Marilyn saw the reality behind the hits. Panic attacks, paranoia, long silences, and terrifying outbursts of despair. By 1966, Brian had stopped touring, retreating fully into studio work. It was during these years that he created Pet Sounds, the album that would change music forever. Marilyn later wrote, "The world heard sunshine. I heard suffering. Every note was him fighting to stay afloat." In the studio, Brian would obsess over tiny details, endless takes, unconventional instruments, and chord progressions that no one else could hear in their minds. He pushed musicians to the edge, but also himself far beyond it. After manic 20-hour recording marathons, he'd collapse into bed, sometimes for days, lost to exhaustion and the voices in his mind. At home, Marilyn became his caretaker. She fed him, soothed him, and tried to protect their daughters from the unpredictable tides of his illness. "Brian was not slipping away from me," she wrote. "He was slipping away from himself." By the early 1970s, their marriage had transformed. The once vibrant young husband now spent days in bed, his mind clouded by drugs, alcohol, and fear. Marilyn described trying to feed him, only to return and find the food untouched. She'd find him staring blankly at the ceiling, convinced the air conditioning was whispering messages to him. His drug use spiraled from LSD to cocaine and amphetamines. His weight increased dramatically as he spent years confined to his bedroom, while Marilyn balanced motherhood, music, and emotional survival. She protected her daughters as best she could. "How do you explain to a 5-year-old that daddy isn't sick the way other people get sick?" she wrote. "How do you make them feel safe when their home feels like a storm?" Her words expose a truth far removed from the golden harmonies of the Beach Boys. Behind the perfection of their sound was a home that had fallen silent except for the echoes of Brian's pain. By 1979, Marilyn could endure no more. She filed for divorce quietly. No interviews, no accusations, no public drama. Just departure. She didn't ask for his fortune. She didn't sell her story. She simply stepped out of the narrative entirely, vanishing from public life. Leaving Brian wasn't leaving a marriage, she later wrote. It was saving myself and our daughters from drowning with him. That decision marked one of the most complete disappearances in celebrity history. For nearly half a century, Marilyn never spoke about her life with Brian. She didn't attend his award ceremonies, didn't comment on his biographies, and didn't participate in the films made about him. Her silence became legendary, a void in the story of a man whose every other moment had been dissected. After the divorce, Brian's decline continued until one man entered his life. Dr. Eugene Landy, a therapist whose methods blurred the line between treatment and control. At first, Landy seemed to help. Brian lost weight, returned to writing, and appeared more stable. But soon, Landy took over everything. His diet, medications, money, and music. Brian's life became a managed experiment. His family watched helplessly as his autonomy vanished. Marilyn's letter briefly mentions this era, though with restraint. "I saw the light in his eyes turn from confusion to fear, and there was nothing I could do." It wasn't until years later that another woman would step in and help free him from Landy's control. In 1986, Brian met Melinda Ledbetter, a car saleswoman who recognized something deeply wrong in the fragile man sitting across from her. She saw not just the legend, but the broken human behind him. Melinda worked tirelessly to uncover the extent of Landy's exploitation. Her efforts led to a court order permanently removing Landy from Brian's life in 1991. When Brian and Melinda married in 1995, it was a new chapter. With her care and stability, he completed and finally released Smile, an album he'd abandoned decades earlier. He toured again. He smiled again. Marilyn's letter addressed Melinda with grace and gratitude. "I was thankful she could give Brian what I could not. She came into his life when he needed structure, not rescue. The Brian she loved was not the same man I married." Those lines reveal a profound emotional intelligence. A woman who, after years of suffering, could still acknowledge another's love with peace rather than jealousy. When Melinda died in early 2024, Marilyn sensed what was coming. Though she hadn't spoken publicly about Brian in decades, she had quietly kept in touch with mutual family members, asking occasionally about his health. "When I heard about Melinda's passing," she wrote, I knew he would drift further away. She was his anchor to reality. Without her, the tide would take him. That prediction proved heartbreakingly accurate. In his final year, Brian's dementia worsened. He would ask for Melinda, forgetting she was gone. He wandered his home, often sitting silently at the piano where he had once created God only knows. In perhaps the most poignant act of all, Marilyn wrote one final letter, not to their daughters this time, but to Brian himself. She had it delivered to his home. I wanted him to know that despite everything, those years mattered, she wrote. I wanted him to feel, even through the fog, that he had once been deeply loved. The letter was placed on his piano, the same piano where Surfer Girl and Don't Worry Baby were born. No one knows if he understood it, but symbolically, it completed the circle they began as teenagers. When Brian Wilson passed away, the tributes came fast and loud. Artists from every genre praised his brilliance. Entire radio stations dedicated days to his songs. Yet, the most meaningful tribute wasn't public. It was that private letter read in a quiet room, where his daughters wept and finally understood the truth about their father's life. Marilyn wrote in its closing lines, "Brian's music was his language, beautiful, impossible, and filled with colors most people can't hear. But that same brilliance made it hard for him to live in the ordinary world. The harmony he gave to others he could never find for himself." Those words redefine Brian Wilson's legacy. His genius and his suffering weren't separate, they were intertwined. Every breathtaking harmony carried both light and shadow. For Carney and Wendy Wilson, their father's illness shaped their entire childhood. They've spoken of Christmas mornings where he never left his bed, and days when he looked through them instead of at them. Their own music career, with Wilson Phillips, became both tribute and therapy. Songs like Hold On and Release Me were, in many ways, emotional responses to growing up in a house filled with love and sadness. Marilyn's letter gave them context. It helped them understand that their father's distance wasn't rejection, it was illness. That their mother's silence wasn't coldness, it was survival. During the private family reading after Brian's funeral, Carney held the letter close. It wasn't meant for the public, but for healing. It felt like she gave him back to us, one family friend said later. Not the legend, the man.